One summer, myself and two friends, we were at the reservoir. We stopped for a chat. We were looking over the bridge and we just seen certain objects flashing in the water. I went and got out a ratchet strap from my van and we kept throwing it in and trying to fish it back. Eventually we start catching on to different items. We snagged up a mask and I had a plastic ball that you'd place in your mouth. Then we snagged up another mask and there was no eyes or anything in the mask and it was just a zip at the mouth. A couple of days later on the news, there was a body discovered.
In a remarkable coincidence, items connected to Elaine O'Hara were discovered in the water at the same time as a woman walking dogs in the Dublin mountains found her remains.
If ever I saw a case where the bones of the dead cried out for justice, it was the bones of Elaine O'Hara.
This became one of the biggest police investigations in the history of Ireland.
One of the most grotesque and harrowing cases our society has ever witnessed. You had this very vulnerable young woman whose family tried to do everything they possibly could to help her and save her. And she got into the clutches of this predatory monster who picked her out like prey on the Serengeti.
Behind this was somebody who had these horrific fantasies and who had acted on them. He didn't look like a monster. He was the very essence of middle-class respectability.
Nobody knew what he was capable of. This man is a brutal, sadistic pervert. He's nothing on his mind but murder.
On the 11th of September 2013, Mr. William Fagan came to Roundwood Garda Station concerned with a number of items that he had found in the Fartree Reservoir. When somebody throws something into a reservoir, it said to me that there was something being concealed, that there was more to discover. When I got to the reservoir, I looked over the bridge and in the water I could see something gleaming. I climbed down the embankment and I entered the water. I had to dredge through the mud. I found a knife and a set of keys. But there was also a supermarket loyalty fob. It was something to go on. It just screamed to me something sinister had happened. I'd got the number from the supermarket loyalty fob and I contacted that supermarket. That loyalty fob was registered to an Elaine O'Hara. Elaine O'Hara had been a missing person for 13 months. I had that sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach.
I was aware that a body had been found by the dog walker in Killikee Mountain. This is the area here where the dog walker found the body. She loaded all the dogs into the back of her Jeep and her own dog, Millie, wouldn't come back. So the dog walker had to go in underneath the dense undergrowth to retrieve the dog. She found her dog, Millie, chewing on a very, very large bone. On closer inspection, she saw tracksuit bottoms, a runner, and she saw what she thought was a human jawbone. The Gardaí then were immediately called. The scene was sealed off and a full forensic team was called to recover the remains.
When the forensic team arrived at the scene, all the bones are photographed in situ. The forensic anthropologist suspected that they may be the remains of a female. However, this cannot be confirmed until a post-mortem examination has taken place.
The pathologist and forensic anthropologist were able to determine that the remains were a female in her late 20s or 30s. The body was in the area for a year at least. From that information, we were able to check on the missing persons files. The dental records were compared to the jawbone that was recovered with the remains. It was at that point that we were able to determine definitively that that was Elaine O'Hara.
I thought it was incredible that these two chance discoveries by fishermen at Fartry Reservoir and by dog walker in Kiddicky would happen days apart. The evidence connected to Elaine O'Hara created a chilling picture.
The remains of a woman found in the Dublin Mountains 4 days ago have been identified as those of Elaine O'Hara. She was from Killiney in South County Dublin.
This discovery became national news. This woman who had been missing for over a year, her remains had been found and foul play was suspected. Elaine grew up in South County Dublin, quite a well-off area. As a teenager, she had some mental health difficulties and she eventually ended up being put on some medication. Her father described how this led to her not really enjoying her teenage years. She had been very affected by the death of her mother in 2002. This affected her very deeply. She suffered from feelings of depression. She had suicidal ideation at times. But she had also tried to get on with her life. She worked in childcare. She was getting a qualification in Montessori teaching that she was hoping to achieve. So while she was vulnerable, while she had very grave difficulties growing up, she was someone who was making an effort at the same time to try and get on with things, to try and establish a life for herself.
Elaine O'Hara was 36 years old when she died. The family were devastated. They were just coming to terms with the fact that Elaine went missing, and now they're being told that it is a potential murder. A murder deep in the forests in Dublin Mountains. They can't believe what they're hearing.
To get Elaine up here to the Dublin Mountains and to take the items away from Elaine and dispose of them in the Fartry Reservoir. Somebody was definitely involved.
In no way could it be considered a spontaneous act. It was most certainly choreographed. It was most certainly geographically examined. It was most certainly planned down to the last minute detail.
A murder investigation was set up here at Blackrock Garda Station.
The pathologist concluded that the skeletal remains of Elaine O'Hara discovered did not exhibit any marks or features that would allow them to determine the cause of death. The knife that was discovered in close proximity to Elaine O'Hara's keys in the reservoir could not be forensically connected to the murder. We didn't have any witnesses. We didn't have any incriminating DNA, and we didn't have motive. Short of somebody coming forward and confessing to the murder, it was unlikely we were going to be successful in its investigation. Not a sliver of evidence or an item of corroboration could be overlooked. Nothing could be left to chance.
We had to go back to the very, very start and re-examine the missing persons investigation.
Shortly after 5 p.m. on Wednesday, the 22nd of August 2012, Elaine O'Hara disappeared from her apartment in South County Dublin. Earlier that morning, Elaine had been discharged from hospital, having spent a number of weeks receiving treatment for some mental health issues that she had. Her medical team had assessed Elaine's suicidal ideations and had diagnosed them as being of medium risk. After leaving hospital, Elaine visited her father, Frank. Frank was babysitting his grandchild, Elaine's niece, to whom she was devoted. When Elaine arrived at the family home, Frank recalled that she was in very good spirits. In actual fact, he stated that he hadn't seen his daughter in such good mood for quite some time.
On the day Elaine was released from hospital, her dad suggested that they go and visit her mom's grave here at Shangana Cemetery. She was very upset and at times crying at the grave, which was also unusual for Elaine at the time. But bear in mind, she had just been in hospital for a number of weeks and she'd been released, and it was an emotional time for her.
Elaine told her dad that she needed to go home. She needed to get an early night, as she was participating as a volunteer in the Tall Ships Festival that was visiting Dublin the following morning. Frank O'Hara's partner had pre-arranged with Elaine to pick her up and bring her to the Tall Ships Festival. However, when she arrived there was no answer from Elaine's apartment. She tried her on the mobile phone, there was no answer. Frank went to Elaine's apartment. Frank discovered Elaine's iPhone sitting on the table being charged. Frank noticed that Elaine's handbag was also there. These were two items that Elaine was rarely, if ever, seen without, everywhere she went. I can only imagine the fear and trauma that Frank O'Hara and his family were now having at this point in time when there was no contact with Elaine.
Elaine's brother went to Shangana Cemetery to search for Elaine because her mother was buried there and she was very close to her mother, Eileen.
Elaine's brother discovered Elaine's car here, abandoned. He found a number of essential items that the family always associated Elaine as carrying with her everywhere. A driving license, 2 packets of cigarettes, and a charger that was not familiar to her family. It appeared it was a charger belonged to another phone.
Her father and her other loved ones realised something had gone wrong here.
He contacted the Gardaí, who were immediately deployed to the scene here to conduct a search.
This is a major operation because we're dealing with a missing person, and at this stage the family are frantic as to where she might be. The operation consisted of utilising the air support unit, the underwater unit. Helicopters combed the shore and beyond into the sea. There was no sign or sight of Elaine.
It's normal practice for a missing persons investigation to return to the scene or the area where the victim may have been last seen. The Gardaí returned the exact day and time a week later, as this may unearth witnesses that may have interacted with her or spotted her. She met a man out running. She asked him where the beach is. He pointed in the direction of a footbridge, which is down this direction here, over a railway line, which would have brought her down to the shoreline. He made a very poignant observation insofar as that he said when he interacted with Elaine, she seemed quite distant, quite disinterested, quite preoccupied. The last item we have is Elaine walking alone towards the footbridge that brought her down to the shore.
The initial investigation, it indicated that Elaine had walked in this direction. Looking at her previous health history gave the indication that she may have taken her own life.
This was the fear the family were really experiencing, and indeed the fear that investigators were experiencing. Unknown to everybody, family and investigators alike, lurking in the background to all of this was a depraved, evil predator who had in fact meticulously and with a lot of cunning planned the scenario that Elaine had taken her own life. I have no doubt that the killer felt that he had succeeded in these endeavours until 13 months later, when extraordinary coincidences intervened and turned these plans completely upside down.
The discovery of the S&M paraphernalia in the reservoir significantly influenced the direction of the investigation. It provided critical context in the search for evidence and identified potential connections to Elaine O'Hara's lifestyle and relationships.
The Gardaí knew she had expressed certain desires. She had said to her psychiatrist she wanted to be tied up.
One of the recurring themes that was evident from the medical records provided to the investigation was fantasies about self-harm, fantasies about having other people inflict harm on her.
Shortly after Elaine disappeared, Elaine's father returned to her apartment to have another look around. He returned with his partner. She found a latex bodysuit in a laundry basket.
Elaine's brother, he also discovered a diary with a website called FetLife written on it. Elaine's brother set up his own profile on the FetLife website in order to discover if Elaine was still alive. The website was for people involved in the BDSM community, people who had an interest in bondage, domination, sadism. He was quite shocked by what he discovered.
The revelation that Elaine O'Hara was living a secret life in the world of BDSM came as a profound shock to the family. They feared that Elaine may have been manipulated or harmed by somebody who exploited her vulnerabilities.
The profile of Elaine O'Hara appeared to be in contact with another profile with the username Architect72.
All this later became of significance and became a building block for the case that the Gardaí were building when it became clear this was much more sinister than they had initially thought. As the story became bigger and bigger, witnesses came forward. A friend of Elaine's, she had spent time with her in St Edmundsbury Hospital in Lucan. She was watching the news one evening and saw the story. She went to detectives to tell them what she knew. She said that Elaine had told her she was in a relationship with an architect, that he was married and had children, and that he used to cut her. The most extreme forms of fetishes that you could ever imagine, which involved stabbing, which involved bloodletting, which involved saying he wanted to stab her. She also said that she didn't want to tell anybody about this. She said that the man had children and she didn't want to upset the children.
So then we had information from one of the nurses at the hospital. Elaine told her about the physical aspects of that relationship, the bondage and the stabbing. The sinister element of that was he was texting her constantly. He seemed to be putting pressure on her to escalate the physical depth, the aggression, the violence that he was inflicting on Elaine. She told one of the nurses that he had a key to her apartment so he could come and go as he pleased.
It was a very significant breakthrough in the investigation.
On the day that Elaine O'Hara was reported missing, a decision was made by the detective superintendent in charge to seize the hard drive of all the CCTV footage for Elaine's apartment block, should we need it at some stage in the future. At the time of the murder investigation, I was given the job to coordinate all CCTV footage relating to the apartment block where she lived. It was a fairly mammoth task to review this footage. There was something like over 5,300 hours. It was like looking for a needle in the haystack. We were looking through CCTV footage, but we really didn't know what or who we were looking for. At one stage, while reviewing the CCTV, one particular individual enters the apartment block. We hadn't noticed this male enter before. It was someone new to us. He piqued our attention a little bit when he seemed a little bit uncomfortable. He seemed to be hiding his face from the camera. Also, when he went to push the button for the lift, he covered his hand with his sleeve of his jumper. That alerted us a little bit. That was a bit of a red flag. We started looking more intently into this man.
We were aware that Elaine O'Hara's life revolved around her phone. The Gardaí took possession of Elaine O'Hara's mobile phone and her MacBook computer. The items were sent to the Garda Telecommunications Section and Computer Crime Investigation Unit to download all the material. It was discovered that Elaine O'Hara had synced her laptop with her iPhone, and as part of that sync, there were numerous text messages discovered on the laptop.
It looked as if Elaine had intervened herself because, crucially, she had backed up her phone in May of 2012, some 4 months before she went missing. Whether consciously or otherwise, this could send us in the right direction to our killer.
When we put together the information that came from the MacBook, from the iPhone, and from the phone networks, we found that there had been over 2,600 messages exchanged between Elaine O'Hara's phone number and another mobile phone. The phone had been registered in what appeared to be a false name, Garun Kaisholm. All the contact of the phone was to or from this number. That phone had been bought for the sole purposes of contacting Elaine O'Hara. It was clear that he was intent on reviving a previous relationship, that he was still interested in sadomasochism, and that he wanted to have Elaine O'Hara back in his life as a partner for these activities.
It was clear from the text messages that there had been a pre-existing relationship that had waned for one reason or another. He was putting the pressure on then to rekindle this relationship. These text messages gave us a clear indication of the role of the person who was sending the messages and the recipient of those messages. He was clearly the master, the dominant in this S&M relationship. The messages were taking it to a completely different level. It was much more aggressive, much more violent. He was blaming her for indicating to him at some point in the past that she had a desire to end her life or have it ended for her.
For some reason, I always got this image in my mind when I was reading the text messages of this mouth snarling and screaming and frantic and demented, blackened teeth, hair on the face, spittle everywhere. They are the rantings of a monster.
He preyed on an innocent, vulnerable human being who only wanted a relationship and someone to love her.
She mentioned that she wanted to have kids and for someone to love and care for her. Unfortunately, he exploited those desires and manipulated her for what he wanted.
She wanted a child. It was something he exploited and tried to prey on and tried to get her involved in his schemes with the offer of perhaps giving her a child.
His MO, his modus operandi, the way he was manipulating and taking advantage of Elaine, her desires to have a relationship and maybe even a child at some stage. He was using all of that to string her along, to lure her further and further into this relationship to achieve his own goals, which was to inflict harm on her.
It was obvious from the data that I had seen on these phones that there was a person out there who had an insatiable desire to stab women for sexual gratification, who posed a substantial risk to the public.
It was obviously a cause of great concern because you have this kind of demented creature out there. So there was a great urgency. We need to find who this guy is.
The messages were gone through in detail by the investigation team here in Blackrock Garda Station. The reason for that was to establish who was the person involved in the BDSM relationship with Elaine O'Hara. During a detailed examination of the mobile phones, we found two very, very significant text messages. Elaine had asked how his weekend had went. His reply was, terrible, 15% pay cut, and came fifth in flying. The text message went on to say, sir, fifth is good, and referenced Wicklow. The came fifth in the flying was significant for us. We believed that would definitively lead us to the person who had killed Elaine O'Hara. We looked into a lot of backgrounds of pilots, both in the area and in the Greater Dublin area, and it was extended out. We drew a blank in relation to that. We looked at fly fishing. We couldn't establish any link to fly fishing. One of my detectives mentioned the model aeroplanes flying at the Sugarloaf Mountain in Wicklow. We checked online for the Model Aeronautical Society of Ireland and for the competition held The person who came fifth was Graham Dwyer. Photographs of Graham Dwyer at flying competitions was discovered online.
Detective Sergeant Peter Woods downloaded that picture and he gave it to me, and he asked me to compare it to the images from our CCTV footage, and they were one and the same person, Graham Dwyer.
A check was carried out on the name Graham Dwyer. It showed that Graham Dwyer lived in Foxrock, a very upper class area, and also that he worked as an architect in Dublin.
Graham Dwyer had reported an incident to the Gardaí at his workplace sometime previously, and he had provided a phone number in relation to this incident. This phone number was very similar to the phone number used when registering the Garoon phone.
Graham Dwyer's phone number was similar to the Garoon phone. There was only one digit out on the prefix.
It was obvious from the outset that this person, who we perceived to be the murderer, was living a double life.
Graham Dwyer looked nothing like this person who was expressing these extreme, violent, explicitly sexual and misogynistic views in texts to Elaine O'Hara. He was an unremarkable, very ordinary looking man, married, had kids. He didn't look like a monster. He was the very essence of middle-class respectability. He had been on a television show on Irish National Television where he had talked about a renovation that he had done.
The natural light coming around the mirror lights you to give it an even image.
Memorably, he spoke about a bath and showed it off to the viewers, a bath that had a fish tank.
The aquarium can go under most baths.
Now that we had a suspect, the pace of the investigation accelerated dramatically.
Over the next few weeks, Peter Woods and the rest of the investigation team, they built their case, collated all the information they could in total secrecy. They put surveillance on Dwyer, checked his phones, all the arms of this massive investigation. They built up a massive, comprehensive picture of every aspect of his life. Woods has a great reputation as a good, hard cop. He wouldn't like us telling stories like this about him, but he was determined.
One of the most significant breakthroughs in the investigation was at Vartree Reservoir.
I was aware that items had been found at the Vartree Reservoir in Roundwood that were linked to Elaine O'Hara, including her car keys. I went back to the reservoir. On looking over the bridge into the Vartree Reservoir, I could see a mobile phone. That phone was recovered by the forensic team who were present at the scene.
And it was brought immediately to telecommunications section. I knew that it was going to be very difficult to resuscitate that phone and try and get the data that was contained within. I believed it was next to impossible because the phone had been in the water for 12 months. It had been lying there, congealed in mud. I was completely surprised that the following day they contacted me to say they succeeded in resuscitating the phone and that the data was available.
It was really, really amazing that this phone was able to be powered up.
It was found that there was one contact number. That contact number was saved as MSTR, so master without the vowels. So the phone recovered from the reservoir is the phone that is commonly referred to as the slave phone.
When we found what was referenced as the slave phone, we were able to link it to Elaine O'Hara through the detailed, specific and personal information it contained.
So there was only a small number of text messages on the phone recovered from the reservoir.
So it was decided to go back to Bartry Reservoir and have a look for the phone that was sending the messages to Elaine O'Hara. The Garda Underwater Unit went back and searched deep under the water, and they recovered the second mobile phone. It again was a big surprise that further text messages were recovered from that phone, and they detailed the conversation between the master phone and Elaine O'Hara, leading right up to bringing her to Shangana Park when Elaine O'Hara went missing. It showed the end of the relationship between the master and the slave phone. Elaine O'Hara had been in St Edmundsbury Hospital for a period of 6 weeks prior to her disappearance. During this period, the master was in contact with her, berating her for not being available to her master, and stating that when she got out, she would have to take a big punishment.
Horror of the manipulation and harassment and psychological warfare perpetrated on Elaine O'Hara, who was a vulnerable woman. She was being tortured.
Elaine had come out of hospital that day. He had bombarded her with text messages, where she was to go, how she was to go, what she was to do. It was obvious she was afraid of him. She was begging him not to do this to her and not to do that to her. But he ignored everything she said.
When Elaine O'Hara is discharged from hospital, she returned to her apartment and she receives instructions from the master to meet up at Shangana Cemetery later that evening.
The network call data records includes a list of all the calls and text messages sent and received by the requested number, and these include cell sites. Each network has their own masts around the country. On the day of Elaine O'Hara's disappearance, we can see that the master phone used cell sites consistent with the journey from the Dublin city centre area where Graham Dwyer worked out towards the Shangana area.
So this next piece of footage that we're looking at now, it shows Elaine O'Hara on the day she went missing. Elaine exits the apartment block She walks down to the car park and she gets into her car and leaves.
Elaine arrived at Shangana Cemetery at about 5:20 p.m. on the 22nd of August 2012. The slave phone that she was using to contact the master pinged off a mast which was in the general area of Shangana Cemetery. The master phone was also using cells or pinging off a mast which was in the general area. The text indicated that Elaine was lost in Shangana Park. The jogger we spoke to had pointed her to the bridge over the railway track leading down to the shore. The jogger continued on his run around the park and he saw Elaine on the other side of the bridge heading down towards the shore. We could see that the master was instructing Elaine to meet up at this point here, which is down the steps, down to the shore. The last text message from the master phone to Elaine's slave phone is, "Go down to shore and wait." We have no doubt that Elaine O'Hara was picked up here in a car and brought up to Killikee Mountain. The pathologist can't tell us exactly what happened in Elaine's final moments.
This young, vulnerable woman, all alone, you can't help but putting yourself in what she might have been feeling at that time up there in that very lonely, isolated area, on her own with this person who was her killer, her murderer.
It is highly likely that Graham Dwyer drove directly from Killikee to the reservoir and disposed of the items in the reservoir.
It was only a matter of time before all the dots would be connected. The net was closing on Graham Dwyer.
He's a violent person, capable of violence. Is there a risk to the arresting members themselves? Is there a risk to the community at large? Might we be in a siege situation?
I arrived at Graham Dwyer's home. I rang the doorbell. He immediately went back up the stairs. I got worried that he may try to escape.
There was a big fear that he might do something desperate.
And his heart has to fight again, so both had to suffer. Hello, now I know what to do when nostalgia always overflows. I wanna scream and let the whole world know that I'm in love. A love that goes against the road and against the sun. suffer. Hello, now I know what to do when nostalgia always overflows. I wanna scream and let the whole world know that I'm in love. A love that goes against the road and against the sun. A love that is more bitter than happy. And sometimes I wanna give it all up, but I can't do it, bro. When love has grown, breaking up is a painful thing. Do you know when that falls? I feel so low.